which one of these two shots was shot on a professional mirrorless camera and which one was shot on the DJI Osmo Pocket 4P. To be honest, I thought the results would be much more obvious, but after reviewing the footage, it really wasn't. The results of the 4P were shockingly good. And this is not a sponsored video. I bought the 4P with my own money to use it as a travel cam. But after reviewing the footage, I really thought of using the 4P as a B cam for professional productions. But the 4P cannot be as good as my main camera. There must be limitations. So in which situations would it become obvious that the B cam is a fraction of the price of the A cam? And that's what we want to find out in this video. So we have a very bright scenario. You can see the sun hits my face hard on that side. And you can judge where do the skin tones look better, how is the transition from very bright to darker on that side of my face. To make it clear, this is the Lumix S1 Mark II footage and this is the Pocket 4P footage. This is now a much darker scene and my guess is that the Lumix S1 Mark II, which is this camera, needs to be better here because of the much larger sensor. It has a full frame sensor, whereas the Pocket 4P only has a 1-inch sensor. Actually, the 1-inch sensor from the Pocket 4P is only approximately 13 mm by 9 mm, whereas the sensor from the Lumix S1 Mark II is 36 by 24 mm. So the sensor size is more than 7 times as big. In addition, the Lumix has a much bigger lens, of course, whereas the one on the 4P is tiny. I guess the whole image processing pipeline in the Lumix is much better because of the better processors. We will see what comes out of the Pocket 4P. Well, when we review this on the computer and zoom in 300%, then and only then I can see a bit of a difference. The shadows are a bit cleaner on the Lumix, but with a bit of color grading, you could work with both. I did not expect this. Let's do a real stress test. We filmed this high contrast scene and we tried to protect the highlights in the background and let my face intentionally go a bit too dark. Later in post-production, I want to raise the exposure of the face to see if we get some artifacts and how the footage in general holds up. I think we can clearly see that the Lumix contains more information in the shadows. Let's make this even more visible by pushing it 2 stops. And I think we can clearly see that the shadows of the Pocket don't contain as much data as the shadows in the Lumix. The shadows of the Lumix, even lifted by 2 stops, still look rich and full of detail, whereas the shadows of the 4P really fall apart. It looks grainy and washed out. And I've made some other tests that all showed the same result. In bright daylight, both cameras are almost undistinguishable. It's amazing how good the Pocket looks. By the way, I have filmed everything you've seen here in DLOG 2. But the second 60mm lens, where you can only film in DLOG, is almost as good. You can see this here. And to be honest, I wouldn't see a huge difference in these 2 shots. But as soon as you start shooting against the sun, we see the same effect as we've seen before. The shadows look a bit washed out. We can always work on this in the color grade by adding some contrast, but in general the details in the shadows are not as good as in the Lumix. But there is a myth online that tells you to shoot ISO 100 at DLOG 2 to preserve the most highlights. But this is wrong and I'll show you why. Look at the sun, this is ISO 800. The sun is very small, you can see details in the area around the sun. And this is with ISO 100. You see the sun is only a clipping white spot, much bigger than before, that contains no information at all. And we can clearly see this in the waveform. This little peak is the sun and only on top it is a bit cut off, which means it's clipping in this tiny spot. With ISO 100, much more is cut off from the peak highlights, so the clipping spot is now much wider. The rest of the waveform is completely the same, just the highlights are cut off earlier, which means you just lose information in the brightest highlights, so there is no benefit of shooting ISO 100 at all. Prove in the comments that I'm wrong, but my tests have shown that this is really true. To sum it up, I really think that you can use the Osmo Pocket 4P as a B cam for a professional production. Although, as we've seen, there are some situations where I would not use it, and the one thing that really bothers me with this camera is that there are no exposure tools at all on that tiny screen. You have to open the Mimo app on your phone and have a look at the histogram to really get an idea of how your exposure is. That's a bit cumbersome. On the other hand, I wouldn't know how much sense it would make to add a histogram to that tiny screen. I will make a lot more videos about the Osmo Pocket 4P in the next time, so if you're interested in that stuff, consider subscribing and see you again in the next one.